Give you the right one and me the right one? Excellent. Hopefully. Yes. Okay. Hi, my name is Noirin Plunkett, and I am, as Siobhan mentioned earlier, the Executive VP of the Apache Software Foundation. What that means is I do the work and I don't have to go to quite so many of the meetings. The Apache Software Foundation is, as some of you may or may not know, a lot bigger than just the web server. We're a 501c3 with the mission of providing open source software for the public good at no cost. And what we're trying to do by setting up the foundation is to provide a shelter, to provide the infrastructure that projects need so that open source contributors can get on with what they like doing. We try to protect individuals from legal threats that may come as a result of their releasing code. This was a much bigger issue when the Apache group was initially formed, and coming out of the NCSA community, people were much more afraid of that kind of thing. Nowadays, it's less of an issue. We also hold things like trademarks, money, domains, all of that kind of stuff. Keep those things safe for our communities. And we do that as a community so that it's not just one person who could disappear, who could get fed up, who knows. Our license is permissive, business-friendly, pragmatic. We try to make sure that you can do whatever you want with our software, and we don't try to restrict that to only people who want to look at the code, but people who want to sell it, people who want to wrap it up in a different wrapper, put a new label on it. All that kind of stuff is fine with us. We accept a license, a copyright license from our contributors. We don't accept copyright grants. So our contributors are free to relicense their stuff elsewhere, and it just means that it's easier for people who have various forms of work to hire agreements and all of that kind of stuff to work with us. We're a membership-based corporation. We're based in Delaware because their laws are nice and easy, and the filing fee for your annual report is $25. We have 6 paid contractors. We never pay for development, but we do pay 4 full-time sysadmins, 1 part-time marketing and publicity lady, and we have a part-time exec assistant who helps us organize our meetings, keep our calendar up to date, remind us when we need to renew domains, and all of that kind of stuff. Our budget is about $750,000 a year. We spend on the order of $500,000 a year on our technical infrastructure, about $150,000 on events, which includes both producing events and also getting people to those events, so we have a travel fund. And we spend about $100,000 a year on publicity, most of which is used to make sure that we continue to have that $750,000 a year coming in. The projects, we have 10 cross-foundation projects. So those are projects that exist to keep things up and running. The events committee, the infrastructure committee, the travel committee, and so on. We have 20 retired projects, and I'll talk a little bit more about retirement towards the end of the talk. We have 50 incubating projects, and those are projects that are coming in, learning how we work, figuring out whether Apache is where they want to be, and hopefully eventually becoming Apache projects. And at last count, we have 102 top level, although I realized we'd had a board meeting since I last looked, so we may now have 105. We average about 400 commits a day, so about 1 every 4 minutes. The legal structure is very much top-down. The board exists to keep the rest of us out of trouble. It's a 9-member board elected by the members of the foundation on an annual basis, and it's a very blunt instrument. The board very rarely gets involved in the work of the projects. When it does, it tends to be an all-or-nothing thing. The officers report to the board on a monthly basis. Obviously, with 100 and something projects and only 9 members on the board, they can't keep on top of absolutely everything. So each project has a VP responsible for reporting back to the board once a quarter. And typically those reports are so-and-so many new committers, such and such activity, this many releases, and that's about all the board needs to know, unless there's a problem. And the VPs head those project management committees, which again, I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. On the technical side, we go absolutely the other direction. We start with our contributors. We have about 4,200 contributors who have a copyright license on file with us. about 3,200 of those are committers, so they actually have a commit bit. And then the project management committees, I should actually have run the numbers on this, but each project has a project management committee, typically at least 10 people. I think the HGPD is on the order of 50 to 60 people. So that's probably the biggest one that we have. And those project management committees have two responsibilities. They vote on releases, and that gives us the legal backing to say, yes, this is a release of the foundation and you needn't worry about liability. They also vote in new committers. No other business is conducted by the project management committees. Everything else is conducted on our public lists to which anybody is welcome to contribute. The principles on which those public lists operate: collaboration, consensus, oversight, non-affiliation, diversity, and a do-ocracy. Sometimes we'll use the word meritocracy, but I'll cover a bit more about the difference when we get there. We believe if it didn't happen on a mailing list, it didn't happen. There are a couple of reasons for this. First of all, it gives people an opportunity to chime in. Not everybody is at their computer 24/7. We have a huge diversity of contributors across the world, different time zones, different lifestyles, and so we ask people to put everything on the mailing list. We also have a diversity of contributors over the 15 years of the Foundation's life. And by putting things on mailing lists, it's much easier to search those archives to see what happened. You can Google it. We have obviously our own search project, so we also use that. And so when an argument needs to be rehashed, you can see what the decision was last time, what the arguments were, and you can say, has anything changed or has it not? Do we need to bring this up again? No, we covered that 2 years ago. It's still, the state is still the same. So nothing, obviously we have discussions on IRC. We have a lot of user help on IRC. We meet in person. We have a lot of beer. Things get done in person, but if it doesn't go back to a mailing list, get reported to the mailing list, get discussed on the mailing list, and get agreed on the mailing list, it's not a decision. How do we agree things? We operate on a consensus basis. Consensus does not mean I like what you're doing. Consensus means I'm willing to let you do what you're doing. We have version control. We actually have our own version control project, Subversion. We can roll things back. You commit something that we don't like, that's okay. It's bits in a source control tree. It's really easy. That said, we very rarely do roll things back. It's really not that difficult when you're working on a project with people to have a sense for where things are going, to have a sense for what's going to be controversial, and to be able to speak up and say, hey, you know, I want to change the way that we load our modules. Everybody has a different opinion on how we should do this. Let's talk it through. Any decision needs to allow 72 hours, again, to allow all of those people in different time zones, different holidays, and so on, to have a chance to chime in. And it's just social controls. Nobody is going to actually prevent you from committing something after 48 hours. But be nice to each other. Get in the habit of it, and it sticks. The oversight is very important from a legal perspective, but also from a social perspective. The rule of 3 goes 3 days, 3 people. Lazy consensus is fine. We don't actually have to agree on everything and have everybody give their voice. If you don't say anything, we assume you're okay with it. Pardon me, there was one other thing. Oh yes, consensus, if you get to a vote, you've failed. The whole point of consensus is we don't need to have a vote, okay? We can have a sort of a sense of, hey, what do you guys think? Put your hands up. Don't actually need to count every one of them. I can get a sense of the room without knowing, you know, there's 17 people who say yes and 16 who say no. Well, that's not consensus. Back to the rule of 3, we require non-affiliation. Everybody participates as an individual. Companies cannot join the Apache Software Foundation. They can gladly give us money. We'll be very happy to accept that. But they cannot join. They do not have a voice. They do not have a vote. We never pay for development. And one of the reasons that we never pay for development is that we refuse to allow a situation where you only have 2 or 3 people who understand how the code base works. From the Apache perspective, that is where we started. We started with the NCSA HTTPD, and there were literally half a dozen people who knew how that worked, and they were trying to maintain it and trying to keep it going because their jobs depended on it, and they said never again. And so now there are 60 people who work on the HTTP server, probably 20 of whom are actively working on it like in the last week or 2. Not all of whom understand the whole thing. We probably only have 3 guys who really understand the Windows side of things. But if we were to get down to 2 guys, we would start actively looking for more people to get involved and pushing that side of things. And back to diversity. My talk got ahead of my slides. The do-ocracy. The difference between merit and doing, merit never expires. 10 years ago, you were the guy who, wrote the testing suite. Longer than that, you were the guy who wrote the HTTP RFC. We have those people around. But if you're not actively working on stuff, that's great. We respect what you did, but now we're going forward. We're moving on. We're changing how we do things. That's okay. It's not going to go all down the tubes. And if it does start going down the tubes, come back and start working on it. Fix it. Change it. It's software. Copying this stuff, it's not expensive. Making another one, not difficult. Merit is not transferable. Doesn't matter if you're the guy who wrote the HTTP RFC. You want to go over and work on a different project, you start from the beginning. You start in the same place where everybody else starts. And one of the huge advantages of this is because we have a lot of projects that interrelate, that work together, you've got that guy you really like and respect who's just coming in as a newbie to your project. You're going to make sure that the processes you have for newbies are welcoming and friendly and easy to understand, because you don't want to look like a jackass in front of people you really respect. I mentioned earlier the projects that we have in Incubation, and Incubation is where we learn about the Apache way. We try and help projects get over, first of all, the legal hurdles, making sure that all of their licensing and so on is in order, but really truly to understand the community values. Most of the projects that enter Incubation graduate from Incubation and become top-level projects. The fastest one, I think, was the Subversion project, which, if I recall, took 3 months from entering Incubation to graduating, and most of that was spent on sorting out all of the legal side of things, because they already had a structure that was very much based on the Apache principles. The longest one I think we've had was 2 years, after which the community decided this wasn't for them. And that's just fine. There's no hard feelings. We are happy to accept projects that are working in the same space. We're happy to accept projects that are different implementations of the same standard. Competition is fine, but we prefer it if you'll work together and try and find a way that suits everybody. We don't like to have, this is my turf and this is your turf. And if you need another piece of software, we like to eat our own dog food where we can. That's why we don't Google our mail archives. On the other side, we have the attic, where communities that are ready to wrap up go to. Sometimes that's an active community that just says, nope, Apache, not working out for us. We've had 2 of those in the time that I've been around. Most recently was the iBatis community who forked over to Google Code. We're still discussing what exactly will happen with the trademark there, because they had the trademark for iBatis, and we really only accept voluntary donations. And if you want to go and take your stuff, we're willing to let that happen, but we have to make sure, as a 501c3, there are certain legal requirements in who we give our assets to. And the previous one I'm actually less familiar with, so I'm not even going to go into. We also have projects that are no longer relevant. So for example, Apache Harmony was a re-implementation of the Java spec. Unfortunately, Sun were never willing to give us a test compatibility kit that would allow us to release open source software. And so we decided to wrap up that project. They were one of the few Apache projects, I think over the course of 10 years, they never actually made a release. Releases are one of the things that can never be vetoed at Apache. And so it was all social controls. It was all a matter of what's the right thing for our community. Community over code is our other motto. We don't like to have you build the whole power plant and then check it in all in one go. It's just really rude. It's just really horrid to be on the receiving end of that. Bike sheds are worse. Let's get going. Let's keep moving, keep the momentum up. And genius is commodity. Doesn't matter. We don't want rock stars. We really don't, except at the lightning talks. That's fine. That's great. But when we're writing code, let's all work together. You are not more amazing than any of the rest of us. And if you are, that's fine. Go elsewhere. Bike shed? Oh, it should be green. That's a bike shed where we've built the whole power plant and now we're arguing over the color of the bike shed because it's something simple that everybody feels they can have an opinion on. I am, I think, just about out of time. I will mention the rule of three. This talk is typically not given by an individual. Typically we give this talk in groups of three because three different people have three different ideas of exactly what we're doing, how we're doing it, what's most important. The second link there, the community.apache.org, has the written version of all of these principles and policies, but we also tend not to point people at that because it's much better to get it from somebody who says, well, this is what's written down, but here are the ways that it can differ. Sometimes there are edge cases, there are complications. The Poisonous People is a much longer version of this talk given by two people who are much funnier than I am. And the final link is if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to take them. I'll be back in this room I'll be in the Lowell dining room tomorrow at 11.